So, good morning and good afternoon, depending where you are calling from, you are checking in with us from. Um, I'd like to welcome you to this workshop on sustainable forestry. We are ETI4. As ETI4, we are the Sustainable Forestry Ambassadors for the Connecting Nature platform. And we're going to be discussing sustainable forestry and solutions, finance solutions for sustainable forestry today. So I'd like to welcome you all to this virtual summit organized by Connecting Nature. I'd like to introduce you to, well, first of all, myself. My name is Colm O'Driscoll, and I am a project manager and sustainable forestry enthusiast at ETI4, which is a spin-off of the University of Padova in northeastern Italy. And with me here on the panel for the workshop today is Dr. Alex Pra, who is expert in sustainable forestry investments, and another colleague of ours, Jacopo Giacomoni, who is an expert in bridging finance with sustainable forestry and innovative solutions.
Good morning. Thanks for the invitation.
Good morning and welcome to all of you attending the workshop.
Thank you both. So I guess we can get right into it. But before we do, I'd just like to say that we welcome, of course, question and answers. As you connect with us and listen to the various discussions and presentations, I'd like that any questions and answers that you have are directed towards the question and answers function in the chat box you can see in the top right, and I'll give you an example in the chat of how we would like these questions and answers. So for example, if you have a question on what you see today, you can do something like this. So question and the question, who you want the question directed towards, and then the question itself, why is forestry great, for example. Okay. And the same for Jacopo. Okay. So welcome again, everyone. And yeah, we have a tight schedule. So I would ask that questions and answers are dealt with at the end. But as you are listening to the presentations, the workshop, please, you can ask these questions in the Q&A. But also, you can also like them, and this will give us an idea of the level of importance. So if we run out of time, please like another person's question that is similar to yours, so we can then rank the questions and choose, depending on the amount of time, the top 3 to 5. Okay, so bear with me today, and I'm just going to start sharing my screen. Okay, and if you can all see my screen there today. Okay, so I'm going to speak about sustainable forestry, what it is, and open the floor for our two technicians. So speaking more specifically about valuing forests as solutions. Okay. Most importantly, I think, before we even get into the finance aspect or the solutions, we need to understand why forests are important and why they should be sustainably managed. And the reason why for us, but I think for many other people around the world, is driven by really the necessity to manage our resources more sustainably. And we can see this from increasing frightening trends recently, specifically here. In this case, we're looking at from a very interesting landmark Living Planet report released by the World Wildlife Fund last year, which essentially states that our planet's wildlife populations have now plummeted by 68% since 1970. That's a massive trend, negative trend, and the implications for this we still don't fully understand, but obviously they will have massive implications on all terrestrial ecosystems. It is obvious that this interaction, negative interaction and influence impact on our consumption of resources is also affecting other aspects, also connected to the biodiversity and the reduction of biodiversity, but the pressure we're putting on these ecosystems. Essentially, we don't still fully understand. We're coming into contact with new emerging zoonotic diseases, where even in the case of COVID, there's a high probability now that this is one of the reasons why we've come into contact with this terrible disease is our negative impact on biodiversity and terrestrial ecosystems, specifically forests and their depletion of them. But not only the impact of depletion of our resources and managing them also comes with the climate crisis. And the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration of the United States of America predicted a couple of years ago, based on some models, the following. We're already beyond actually some of these, where you can see, for example, in 2020, one of the models was predicted to increase global surface temperature to 0.5 degrees Celsius. We're already beyond that. 10 warmest years on record have all occurred since 2005. 7 of the 10 have occurred just since 2014. It's incredible. And 2020 ranked as the second warmest year in the 141-year record. So these are all things we're quite familiar with. I mean, as I'm sitting here in Padova, in my home, there's 35 degrees in June, which is not unusual, but these kind of temperatures have been persistent for the last 2 weeks nearly. So this consistency in high temperatures is something we're becoming more and more familiar with, and the impact of that is still not fully known, but obviously there is this need to manage our resources more sustainably, as forests are of course going to be part of the solution. And what that means is essentially how we're going to implement a more sustainable approach, and why as well. I mean, if we consider that 31% of land is covered by forests, yet they contribute only 1% to the GDP, is an incredible figure. There's of course this need to reconsider this massive global resource, and not just from a timber perspective, but also the value of what managing these resources more sustainably means, from the level of impact and the level of contribution it has to the GDP. In the Dasgupta report, so maybe some of you are familiar with the Economics of Biodiversity report that was released in February of this year by Professor Sir Partha Dasgupta. A very conservative estimate within this report with the total cost of global subsidies. These are just speaking about the subsidies that damage nature, is around 4 to 6 trillion per year. We're not speaking about, you know, the reforestation, afforestation, restoration activities. We're only speaking about the damage. So if we begin to speak about these other activities, this amount obviously increases a lot more. So it's obvious that nature has a huge, our impact, negative impact on nature, and not managing forests sustainably obviously has a huge cost associated with it. But that in that cost, there also lies an opportunity. And how can we, of course, manage our forests more sustainably? We need to consider innovative solutions. In the same report, actually, Dasgupta goes on to give 3 interesting recommendations. And while these might seem, you know, futuristic, they're actually solid representations for one of the world's most foremost economists on what we should actually begin to think about doing to reach a more sustainable livelihood and approach to our consumption of world's natural resources, specifically forests in this case. So changing our measures of economic success to guide us on a more sustainable path. You know, GDP does not measure depreciation of nature. Okay, so we need to consider, you know, incorporating nature into our GDP somehow. This in itself has massive opportunity, financial opportunity, both from the public and private sector, if it begins to be incorporated, ensuring that our demands on nature do not exceed its supply and that we increase nature's supply relative to its current level. Okay, and finally, transforming our institutions and systems, in particular our finance and education systems. So, you know, there's already this movement of impact investment and sustainable and responsible investments. But what does it mean? And it needs to be obviously scaled up. And how does it work? We need organizations to show us what, you know, moving from just managing forests sustainably for timber to managing forests sustainably for all those other services that forests provide as terrestrial ecosystems, from biodiversity to carbon to water and so on. Okay, finance and forestry at the moment are totally underfunded. You know, we can't even reach our current level, our current targets that we set ourselves year on year. So we're speaking about, so, you know, some years ago for the next COP, we spoke about trying to mobilize at least 100 billion in climate finance per year by 2020. We're nowhere near that at the moment. I think we're up at about 64 million, and we're not going to reach it by COP26 in October in Scotland. Are we building back better? Revealed, you know, a landmark report again as well by the UNEP, revealed that out of the 14.6 trillion, the world's largest economies, 50 of the world's largest economies, and all these recovery plans where the funding was coming out to be spent post-COVID to reactivate, you know, economies and so on, recover economies, just 368 billion were directed towards green initiatives. And what green initiatives actually means there is still debatable. But here we're moving into sort of nature-based solutions in this debate on nature-based solutions, where there is an increase in investment. Of course, approximately here, 133 billion currently flows into nature-based solutions, where the majority of which is public funds. However, we need to increase incredibly as well the private finance. But how do we do that? To attract private finance is no easy feat. It's something that in ETI4 we've been working on for many years now, trying to attract sort of these innovative finance solutions from the private sector too, and we'll come to that a little bit later with Jacopo as well. So ETI4, what do we do? Well, we essentially try and restore. So we're going to move away from misuse of the word sustainability, because it's an outdated term. Restoration is moving towards restoration is a better approach to how we can kind of find the balance, specifically between humans and nature. Our approach, as I said earlier, ETI4 is a spin-off of the University of Padua. So we tend to approach things in a scientific way, and this is how, as well, we understanding problems, we also present data and the research that we work on to create innovative solutions, and present these as well to the financing institutions, whether they're public or private, to generate then a better and sustainable management of the forests that we interact with. And then, of course, governance. You know, forests are not sort of, in many cases, probably they should be, but standalone entities. In often cases, they're very complicated, connected with human society, whether we're speaking about in developing countries, from mechanisms such as REDD+, or others even in temperate and developed countries where we speak about the kind of forest ownership that we have here in Europe, for example. ETI4 works all around the world, really. So we have an experience in connecting forest finance all around the world, and we have operate essentially in three generic business areas, although specifically each of these business areas have different activities for which we're all specialists of. Local development, more locally speaking, so development of even sustainable tourism opportunities. Responsible management, where we're speaking more about, yes, the sustainable forestry practices, and connecting as well then the final business area, which is sustainable investments to this responsible management of natural resources and alternative forest terrestrial ecosystem services. And most importantly, we're a group of people, because people are essentially the way we can solve these problems, the sustainability problems. People need to understand and interact with the sustainability solutions. So we need to be competent, innovative, international, adaptable, prejudice-free, and so on. If people are not aligned in the application, implementation of the solutions, it will be very difficult to scale them up. So I would like to speak about innovation here, and actually I'm going to stop. I won't speak about it anymore. I'll introduce my colleague now, Dr. Alex Pra, who's more expert in these matters, and we're going to speak about connecting really not just the classical traditional underfunded approach to sustainable forestry, but looking at a wider spectrum of attracting finance to forest, these ecosystems that are forests. So I'm just going to stop sharing now and give the floor to Alex, my colleague, and the floor is yours, Alex.
Thank you, Coleman. Just give me a second that I will share my screen as well. Okay. Can you see it? Perfect. So thanks again, Colm, for the introduction, and thanks to everybody attending. It's very nice to have this opportunity to present at this summit, and I'm glad to see that we're having quite many interested people following this session. So that's very good for us. My name is Alex Pra. I work as a project manager at ETIFOR, and what I would like to present today is it's, let's say, an introduction, an overview, and some insights on the certification of ecosystem services as a tool to promote sustainable forestry. And I organized the presentation in 2 main chapters. So in the first one, I will briefly go through the evolution of forest certification, moving beyond only timber. And secondly, I will give you an overview of the very recent FSC ecosystem services procedure that we use at ETIFOR. And we have experience in this, and we believe it's a promising tool for promoting sustainable forestry. So I will start with the first chapter. What are ecosystem services? I believe most of you are already aware of this concept, so I'm not going into details on this, but for those who are not, ecosystem services are the benefits that people obtain from ecosystem, in this case forest ecosystem, are divided into provisioning services, so timber, wild forest products, medicinal products, regulating, so climate regulation, cleaning water, flood control, supporting ecosystem services, so the soil formation, biodiversity, and so on, and finally cultural ecosystem services, so aesthetics, values, recreation, and the others that you can see here. Even though I must say that in literature you will find a different classification of ecosystem services. Anyway, what is important here is that is to note that forests are essential in order to provide these key benefits to people. And as mentioned in the introduction by Colm, valuing forest ecosystem services is key in order to promote sustainable forestry. So during my university class in forest economics, my professor was used to show us this picture. What can you see here? The panel in the top right corner says Buffet da Forêt gratis, so forest buffet for free. And you can see a rich table full of stuff, and a lot of people enjoy what is provided. In the right down corner, you see a man, it's the chef, and in front of him a plate, a cash plate, which is empty. And I think it's relatively easy to understand what we're talking about here is forest management. What is on the table are all the forest products and services. The chef there is the forest owner or manager. And you can see that all the people there are basically the forest stakeholder, taking advantage of what is provided by the forest, while the forest manager or owner is not rewarded for the work he did. So the key message here is that in order to incentivize the forest owner to manage the forest in a way that can enhance the provision of ecosystem services, there is a need to develop mechanisms that are able to do that. Otherwise, the forest manager or owner will always be focused toward the maximization of the only merchantable product, which is basically timber and a few others. So given that, as I said, ecosystem services are often non-marketed resources and services, economists have been looking for a long time for incentive mechanism to conserve and enhance ecosystem services provision. And I like to say that somehow in the last 20-25 years, we have been moving from sticks approaches, so taxes and subsidies, command and control instrument, to carrots instrument. So payment for ecosystem services and also forest certification. So let's say toward market-based instruments. As said, forest certification emerged as one of those tools. And we know that forest certification, so the independent third-party verification of responsible forest management and the tracking of forest products from the forest to the final consumer, has been launched around 25 years ago after the Earth Summit in Rio. And in this last 25 years, forest certification has become the main market-based instrument in the forestry sector when we refer to certification of sustainable practices or corporate social responsibility practices. And we can see from the graph here that almost 1/6 of the global forest cover is certified according to the two main schemes that are present, so FSC and PFC. So in this last 25 years, there has been a consolidation of the forest certification, in particular timber, but also an enlargement of the focus and the areas of concerns of those standards, mainly connected to the emerging of new markets for carbon, but also for biodiversity and water. I linked here 3 very interesting reports. I believe you can find also updated versions in the website. So certification schemes today support the idea of developing new systems to certify the contribution of forests to ecosystem services provision. Even though those schemes tackles one ecosystem services at the time, and this has mainly been carbon. There are very few, if any, certification schemes tackling other ecosystem services, and these are mainly integrated, included as co-benefits into carbon standards. So the first initiative that expanded this approach towards the idea of certifying multiple ecosystem services is led today by FSC, and this allowed me to move to the second part of the presentation. FSC, for those who are not familiar with this acronym, is the Forest Stewardship Council, so an international organization that has developed what is the most world-renowned certification scheme for sustainable forest management. So a forest management which is environmentally appropriate, socially beneficial, and economically viable. And recently, in 2018, it introduced this new procedure, the procedure for ecosystem services certification, that allows the certificate holders to measure and verify, again, based on a third-party verification, the positive impact of their forest management on one or multiple ecosystem services. And here you can find the link at the web page, so you can click on it in order to dig more on this issue. The 5 categories of ecosystem services that are included in this procedure are biodiversity conservation, carbon sequestration and storage, recreational services, soil conservation, and finally watershed services. Even though, let's say, ecosystem services have always been part of the sustainable forest management certification, with this procedure, they move from being, let's say, implicitly considered to be explicitly certified. And FSC has done this due to the expansion of forest certification also into different forest types, which are not strictly productive. So needed new tools and incentive mechanisms in order to promote the sustainable management of forests that have other purposes rather than only production. For those who are familiar with the FSC framework, the FSC system, the procedure fits into the existing framework. It means that it is just an additional step that forest managers that already achieve the certification of sustainable forest management can take. So basically, the verification of this procedure is part of the main audit that the certificate holders have to carry out in order to get the certification. Let's move now to the most interesting part. So how does this procedure work? It is basically based on 7 steps. So what ecosystem services will we protect? And it can be one of those 5 that I mentioned before. Of course, there are then subcategories, more specific. Second, describe the ecosystem services. So which are the current and past condition, which are the beneficiaries, which are the threats. Third, do we want to maintain, conserve, or restore enhanced ecosystem services? So basically, which are the activities that that we carry out and contribute to this? So this is basically the selection of an impact and the development of a theory of change. 4, the definition of the outcomes that needs to be measured in order to indicate that the activities that we carry out actually have an impact on ecosystem services. 5, how this will be measured. And here there are also methodologies suggested by FSC, but most of the methodologies developed by research institutes or universities can be used here. 6, measure this indicator and compare it to the baseline. And finally, the output that then is verified from the auditor. So basically, this is a 7-step procedure that goes from identifying, describing, choosing the impact, developing a theory of change, choosing the indicator, defining the baseline, measuring it, and compare it to the baseline. And the most interesting part of this procedure is the theory of change. So theory of change, it's a very known concept. So it's a chain of results over time that shows how an organization expects its activity to contribute to a desired impact. And this is very interesting because this makes this procedure closer to a system-based certification rather than a performance-based certification. So FSC asks the forest manager to demonstrate that it's doing something to improve the capacity of the forest to provide ecosystem services. rather than going through this one, I'll show you an example that regard biodiversity conservation, and in particular the restoration of natural forest cover. You see that on the left you have some management activities. For example, the first one is retaining indigenous trees with diameter at breast height more than 20 centimeters as seed trees. This generates an output. So X indigenous trees retained in a planting block, A, B, or C. This output then generates an outcome, which regards the tree species composition, and that finally results in an impact. And the impact is the restoration of natural forest cover in this sense. Of course, all this has to be supported with methodologies and measurements. So there has been already several applications at global level. This certification is active since end of 2018. I'd like to spend a minute on one of these examples, and is an example that we as ETIFOR followed. And this is related to Italy, where the world first certification of all 5 ecosystem services took place at the beginning of 2019, and has been carried out by a certification, a group certification named Val Plus, which is the largest Italian FSC small order certification group, bringing together both public and private owners, managing very different forest types, from alpine, semi-natural productive forests to lowland conservation forests to urban, peri-urban forests for recreation. So a diversity of forest types that allowed this group to always be oriented to the valorization of multiple purpose management and also the valorization of ecosystem services. This procedure, this certification of ecosystem services, allowed Val Plus to obtain financial sponsorship for carrying out these activities. And they have done this using a web-based platform, which is named Wow Nature, and that Jacopo, that will speak after me, will tell you more in details. So a very important message here that I already mentioned is that this positive impact on ecosystem services that are certified results in claims, positive impact claims, that allows forest managers to use this claim to attract sponsorship rewards that are useful also for buyers of FSC certified products, because they can use certified ecosystem services claim. And of course, the sponsor that also promote, that can use these claims to promote the activities that they are carrying out. This in particular appears to us to be a very promoting approach that can be used with quite a lot of flexibility also on small scale forest ownership and in different forest types. Of course, all this is guaranteed also by the FSC database, which allows the transparency of all the sponsorship and activities that are carried out. And in particular, the Annex D, where all the information about the financial sponsorship have to be compiled and are then made public on the FSC registry. I will stop here. Of course, if you have questions or curiosities, please use the question and answer blog in the chat. And I'll give back the floor now to Colm for the next presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. We're a little bit running behind time. I guess we've seen now this relatively new solution way of investors, because you kind of need to track the finance as well, but tracking finance means you also need to be credible, and being credible means you need to have a methodology behind you that can show some credibility, transparency, but also data in you're actually trying to get investment for. So we're going to move now to Jacopo, and Jacopo is going to present to one solution that has actually connected this system that has been presented by Alex to attract investments to sustainably managed forests. I'm going to give you the floor, Jacopo. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Colm. Please confirm me if you see properly my screen. First of all, I'm Jacopo Giacomoni. Today I will present you one of the nature-based solutions that we developed within Etiform, that is basically the Wow Nature platform. Already in this first slide, you can see that it's not just a matter of timber, just a matter of nature, but it's also a matter of engagement, of involving people and the civil society. But what is Wow Nature? Wow Nature basically is a web platform that, of course, you will be able to access towards the link you see here, that aims to inform people and to connect people with the forest in order to restore what Colm said, so the balance in between nature and forestry. But how technically does it work? How can we relate the owners with the people that are willing to support the nature? Basically, in the platform, the forest owners that might be public or private are able to upload their own areas, their own forest that needs restoration activity, for instance, and people that are willing to grow their own trees in their forest have a big portfolio of projects that range from a really local project to international one. And the interesting aspect that is always fundamental when taking forest sustainability issues is the financial aspect. So who is going to put the funds in order to restore this kind of forest? Thanks to the platform, we can collect funds both from private citizens, so people, but also from companies that are willing to support this kind of project for several reasons that can range from welfare within a single company, or corporate social responsibility policies and approaches, or just a strategy for making green communication that shouldn't be confused with green washing, but is communicating in detail and in a transparent way what they did and what they supported. In the platform, you are basically able to do two main actions. The easiest one, the one that is more easy also to communicate to the citizen, is very, very simple. So grow a tree. You can simply go to the platform, decide to support the growth of a tree, and as you will see in the coming slides, you won't just receive, let's say, a digital certificate, but you will then be invited to see the forest and to plant your own tree. Another option that, of course, is more, let's say, holistic as an approach is not just simply grow the tree, but take a commitment towards the reduction of the impact of a specific company, for instance, that can support not planting activity, but protection of an existing ecosystem that maybe is affected by some natural damages or maybe is degraded. how we assure that what we are doing is well made, using what Alex was presenting you before. So a third-party certification schemes that allows the Wow Nature areas and projects to comply with all the standards of sustainable forestry that are the one of the Forest Stewardship Council. So the FSC certification for us is really the way for showing the commitment towards third-party certification schemes. So with the audits, and of course with the huge advantage of being able to show the commitment towards not just the timber, let's say, but also to the other ecosystem services that this forest can or might provide. Who works with us? It's interesting to know that we really range from the single citizen that maybe decided to support the growth of a tree in the forest nearby his own village or his own home, but we also work with international companies. You may know some of the one listed here, like IKEA, of course, is a furniture company, or Luxottica, working in the glass sector. And it's interesting to know that this kind of company, for instance, Luxottica, has nothing to share with forestry, but they do have the commitment to give something back to the nature towards this kind of natural-based solution that support what is done on the field. But there are also other entities, like, for instance, tourism sector companies and facilities that are willing to support their destination, maybe, in order to provide a much more attractive landscape and valley. We are working, of course, in the northeast part of Italy, so I'm referring to alpine forests, for instance, but we do work also in other contexts, as we will see in a while. And what do we usually offer to companies? The first part, of course, is not support companies just willing to do greenwashing. Just saying, we bought a couple hundreds of trees, we are green, we are okay, we want to show the people that we are performing well. No, this is not the approach of the Wow Nature platform. The approach is the one that can be seen in the top left part. So is synthesized by an acronym that is MARC, in which each single letter defined a step that the company willing to support our project need to assess. And as you can see, the planting, let's say, or the restoration part is just the last step. It's not the most important, it's the last one. First of all, the company must commit towards responsibility in terms of measurement of its own impact, then try to reduce what can be reduced in terms of improvement of the production system, for instance, or in switching from maybe not recyclable material to reusable one, reduce the risk of having bad impacts by switching, for instance, to sustainable product in its own business, like might be a 100% FSC certified paper, for instance, and just at the end of the path, understand how to reduce and to capture the CO2 that they are emitting. So this, for instance, is a company producing mineral water. So they have some connection to the forest, but they of course are valuing timber way less that what they value the ecosystem service of water filtration, for instance. So delivering this kind of message to the companies that is not just timber, but the forest is providing filtration is a good way to attract funds for forest owners. But this is just one of the examples. I can show you another one, supermarkets. So nothing to be related with forestry, but they decided to approach this kind of restoration activity with the same paths. So measuring, avoiding, reducing the risks, and then capturing. They decided to work nearby the areas they are operating in the Veneto region in northeast Italy, and they really said that we're much more willing to support forest with ecosystem services such as the recreational one than really natural forest far away from their areas of interest. So it's interesting to notice that forest is not just the natural one, let's say, but can also be the one in a urban context, for instance. And the interesting part of the platform, the Wow Nature platform, is that it can adjust the needs of the clients and find the perfect project to work on. These are just some of the pictures we took from the planting days we were proposing to the companies. And as you see, it's not just a matter of environment, but it's also a matter of social aspects, educational aspects with the kids, the schools that arrived to the planting days asking us, for instance, why the trees are so small or why you decided to plant nearby a highway. And so is a platform that allows us to do also good communication and good scientific knowledge transfer from the university to the final user, regardless of the level of education. So from children to older people is a transversal interaction, but not just forest in the urban areas, but also forest in the Alps. For instance, back in 2018, the northeast part of Italy faced a huge windstorm called Vaia that destroyed several hundreds of hectares with millions of cubic meters. We decided to put some of these areas into the Wow Nature platform, and we had an amazing response from the locals and from, for instance, the tourists that were traveling in that areas that decided to give something back to the forest by supporting the growth of these trees and by arriving physically at the events in order to show their commitment, not just financially, but also in terms of work experience and to workload, let's say. But also international project. So Wow Nature does not have a limit. We are working also, for instance, in Burkina Faso with an association led by women that are producing food and cosmetic products out of plants that were supported financially by international donors and that are supporting the local communities in terms of improved livelihood, for instance, but also in Gaza. So there are several contexts where you can use this kind of approach. So what might be the take-home message of the Wow Nature platform? First of all, the need of being creative. So the world is changing so fast that sometimes we maybe relies on an old way of approaching this kind of strategies. So for instance, forestry, just talking with the forest people or forest-related sectors, but being creative allowed us to broaden the spectrum of the companies doing partnership with us. And so now we have financing coming from a completely different sectors to the forestry sector. And the second one, I don't know why it's written one again, but can be as important as the first one, is putting attention to be coherent and science-based when dealing with this kind of project, because you need to have a strong background in order to be serious and to be transparent with the people that are supporting you. And as a matter of fact, for us, this comes from the FSC certification. This is all. I will share for sure the presentation where with all the links you can go and search and find the areas on the Wow Nature project. And thanks for your attention, and I pass back to my colleague Cole.
Thank you, Jacopo. That was very interesting, and indeed it's continuing with what we were discussing with the evolution from the first presentation to the second, that it's obvious to attract investments to a traditional sector, innovative investments, you need to broaden your scope of services. You need to think about the forests not only for the timber, but also for the wider range of services and functions that they have to offer. And there are markets for these now. There are a range of different markets, and presenting the FSC ecosystem service certification is one way to attract investments to the broader scope of these investments. So I think a take-home message here is for sure when looking to attract additional investments to sustainable practices is to have first of all, to have a methodology as well, a methodology based on, especially when we're speaking about private investment, a methodology based on measurements. And in this case, this interesting approach that Wow Nature applies is in the marks, so the measuring, avoiding, reducing the risk, and capturing. So these measurements essentially the numbers, credible numbers for which investments can follow, whether they're in carbon sequestration or in water or in even the non-wood forest products themselves. Each of these things have a value. You need to understand what that value is, and then be able to sell, if you like, that value to the investors. Great. I've noticed that we have so I launched a poll. I'm just going to move to the poll, and very simple. I wanted to understand from the audience whether or not, now we're speaking about sustainable certification. Here we were focused on wood and forest-based products and ecosystem services, but obviously these sustainable certification approaches are also applied to other sectors, specifically agriculture. And quite surprisingly, so we have, and I'm very glad to see this, a high proportion of participants who are actually in the always are often buying certified products. It's a good start. Great. And I think, yes, we can move to the questions and answers. So I'm just going to open the questions and answers. And yes, we have one question directed for Alex there. I'm just going to read it out, and then I'll leave the floor to Alex from Giovanni Carmantini. So Alex, how does one measure impact typically for the purpose of certification? Example for biodiversity, a hot topic. Is that carried out by the certification agencies?
Okay, thanks, Colm, and thanks, Giovanni, for the question. It's a very good question, and certification of biodiversity, measurement of biodiversity impact, indeed, it's a very hot topic, and also a lot of research efforts are put in this at the moment. Let's say that FSC has a very open and flexible approach. As mentioned in my presentation, is based on a theory of change. So it's more system-based. So it requires you to demonstrate that you're doing something to improve your impact on biodiversity, rather than a performance-based, so fixing a threshold or a goal and ask you to reach that. So for example, as an example, it can be also the number and the ratio of well, the number of species present in my forest area. I measure it as a baseline, and then I will monitor it through time. And for example, if my activities are ecological enrichment, then the number of species for example, native species or ecological adequate species in any case, will grow during time. So then you use this measure to show that you have done an improvement and you're improving this compared to the baseline. So the certification, the procedure on ecosystem services of FSC is based on this theory of change, on this system-based approach. Then you mentioned, is this carried out by certification agencies? No. I believe that for certification agencies, you mean certification bodies, so the auditors, the one that comes and verify that your management system is in line with the FSC standard and also the procedure. What they do is just verify that what you're providing, what you're showing, what you're demonstrating is true, is sound, and it's real. So this work, that the work of measuring and defining this theory of change has to be done by the forest manager or by consultants that can be hired by the forest manager.
Thank you, Alex. I don't know if also Jacopo would like to add anything to that. I just saw another question from Stuart. Jacopo, do you have anything to add first?
No, I think that Alex replied quite in detail. So the idea, the core is this improvement. So you need to show that you're improving that specific ecosystem service. But if you want comment, I can try to reply to Stuart that asked us. I will just read it. So if it is possible to set up sponsorship for small individual sites, or if it is necessary to have a cooperative of smallholders to work together, and if it is the later one, if there's need for an umbrella organization. So we do have really different case studies within the Wow Nature platform, ranging from really big properties, like the one, for instance, in Burkina Faso, to really, really small ones. So it's not a matter of size, I would say, but it's a matter of having a forest owner that is committed to follow what is prescribed by a third-party forest certification scheme, as it is FSC. So finding the owner of the forest, of course, is just the first step, because then the toughest part, I would say, is try to find a matching with a potential company or a potential private citizen that is willing to support that specific area. So is really a matter of working together. The platform Wow Nature can facilitate the search for funding, but as far as the forest owner is committed to our FSC certification and has something to restore, let's say, in the forest, is not a big issue whether it is a really small one or a big one. Of course, as in every project, there's a matter of scale. So bigger the project, usually lower can be the funding required in terms of hectare price, kind of. So there's a scale. Higher the project, lower is the price you can put in a hectare base to support a restoration activity. So it really depends.
Colm, let me clarify one thing related to the previous question that Giovanni asked. Of course, as FSC asks you to demonstrate that you're improving your management that allows the provision of one of those ecosystem services. And this is because the procedure can be applied by forest managers that already achieve the, say, basic sustainable forest management FSC certification. So the level of management and of consideration of environmental, social governance aspect, it's already at a quite high level.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you, Jacopo. I'd just like to backtrack a minute and put all of this in before we close. So we heard from John Bell opening the summit today that there's a wall of money coming for nature-based solutions. That might very well be the case, but as we've seen from the earlier part of this presentation, wall of money is not being directed still towards green. So we still need to be innovative in our approaches in attracting this investment, because investors are hey, let's all invest in green. There has to be a methodology. And the more credible and the longer lasting this methodology is, the better the possibility. Thank you very much, everyone. We're going to leave you there for today. For any further questions, you can contact us via the website. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, and have a fruitful summit.
Thanks to our speakers, Jacopo and Alex.